I'm Jean-Louis de Brouwer, and I'm the director of the UN Affairs program of the Egmont Institute, which is associated with this book tonight. The book series on the future of Europe, Views from the Capitals, is one of TEPSA's flagship initiatives. These books provide topical analysis of European issues from the perspective of each EU member state and neighboring countries. The series is edited by Michael Keeling, Johannes Pollack, and Paul Schmidt. Unfortunately, none of them could be with us tonight, and showcases chapters written by researchers from the TEPSA network and beyond. So far, 5 volumes have been published on the topics of the future of Europe, Euroscepticism, EU solidarity, Russia, and climate change, which is going to be the subject matter of our conversation tonight. So, again, this book gathers 39 analyses of national debates on climate policy within the EU and its neighborhood. We expect to have with our panelists and together with you afterwards tonight a lively conversation, a public debate on the next steps that the EU can take in order to reflect on how it can both reach its own climate goals and contribute to climate solution in this field. Having read the book, I must say that the first takeaway that it struck me is that the EU still nevertheless suffers from great diversity in the political priorities of its 27 member states, making it difficult to speak with a single voice. If I try to sum up in a very, very, very personal way the main findings and the main takeaway from this book, I would first take a couple of quotes from the foreword of Vice President Timmermans, in its introduction to the book. One of them is about the level of ambition of the EU. I quote, delivering on our targets and ambition is not only a moral obligation to future generations and thus to the future of Europe, it is also a prerequisite for peace and prosperity in the world as a whole. So, very high level, very strategic level of ambition. But at the same time, a quite realistic approach. When it comes to success and failure of our transition, I quote again, 2 elements need to be highlighted. First, this transition can work and only if it happens in a fair and socially viable manner. Second condition, we also have to face the risk of a dramatic loss of biodiversity, bearing in mind that nature is our biggest ally in the fight against climate crisis. So a fair understanding of the level of ambition and of the challenge, and therefore of the need, I quote again, to show leadership and ensure a global leap in ambitions. As far as the editors are concerned, their main takeaways in the summary of their different contribution and different messages coming from the contribution could be, again, according to me, summed up around, I would say, 6 to 7 key topics. First, the acknowledgement that the Green Deal is first and foremost a new growth model. It's not only about fixing target, it's about redefining, redesigning, launching on a new basis the growth model at EU and possibly afterwards at global level. Second, and I hinted that already in my introduction, we cannot witness a truly unified European approach for the time being. There is indeed, and we'll hear more from that, progress made on the legislative framework, on the rules and regulation, but practices and situation are still quite different from one member state to another. Third, most Europeans feel anxious about climate changes and its consequences. I mean, this is not that much a matter of elite anymore. It is a deeply rooted anxieties in our population, which, and its abuse of both, translate into very often more active civil society organization in most of our member states. However, one cannot refrain from noting an increasing opposition to renewable energy projects. And then I cannot resist referring to a new syndrome that I was unaware of. As many of you, I was aware of the limbic syndrome, but I discovered that there was a banana syndrome, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. I mean, quite a finding when I read this book. As Vice President Timmermans in his introduction, the editors stress the crucial nature of what they call the social component. If this transition is not fair and just as advocated by the Vice President Timmermans in his foreword, there is indeed a growing risk of, nurturing populism in our member states. We have already many examples, and it shows, of course, when it exists, it does not exist in all member states. For instance, François, who is noting in his contribution concerning Belgium, that there is no such thing as a Eurosceptic party in Belgium yet, but it can indeed nurture Euroscepticism either in civil society organization or in the popular debate, in the public debate, or indeed in political party. And last takeaway that I noted, the cruciality of funding, EU funding. We are all, of course, we are all aware. You are all aware because you are experts and certain more than me about the ongoing debates about global solidarity, the different COP and the different financial compensation instruments which are being discussed for the time being. But there is also a crucial need for, financial solidarity inside the EU. There is the example of Cyprus, for instance, which is highlighted in the introduction and which shows how dependent from EU funding some of our member states can be to perform the transition, which is the necessary consequences of the Green Deal. But the question is, should we make it with the state of play, with the present state of play, with the present level of funding, or will be more funding needed also at a time, let's face it, when possibly the debate and the discussion about enlargement could be relaunched, when most probably at the end of this year, Ukraine and Moldova will ask accession negotiation to be opened with the EU. So all that is basically reflected one way or another in the different contribution to this book. I'm extremely grateful to the TEPSA team, and in particular, I have to speak in front of the mic. Thanks a lot, Eva. I was going to refer to your contribution, Eva, to the TEPSA team and the fantastic support that they gave me in this last day, but also for the fantastic investment of the organization of this evening. I will spare you a long story about funding the rule, for instance, which was not a piece of cake at all, but we managed to be here together tonight, and we managed to be here together tonight with a very first-class panel. Those of you who have been on TEPSA website have already a glimpse of the impressive CVs of those who are with me in front of you tonight. So I will spare you lengthy presentation of each of them, all the more than they are certainly most of them known to you. We have agreed between ourselves about, a speaking order that would help us to move from, I would say, a more global systemic approach. Sandrine Dixon, taking into account your role in the Club of Rome and your different position as advisor in different bodies and entities, has accepted to start with this kind of overall presentation. Then it's really a very personal pleasure for me to have with us tonight Kobe van den Berge, who is the Director General in charge of Clima inside the Commission. I reminded him privately when he came in that when I joined Egmont in the late 2019, the first public event that I organized in the framework of Egmont was a presentation of the Fresh from the Open Green Deal by the then advisor of the President of the Commission on Climate Change, Kobe van den Berge. And that's the reason why I'm so happy to be with us, and with me in particular, tonight. Adelaide Charlier, again, someone does not need to be introduced. You play a prominent role in the development of the youth movement, which was, I would say, epitomizing the involvement of the Belgian civil society in the debate about climate change. And, on the par with different similar movement of that kind in other regions and countries of the EU. It's of the utmost importance to have the voice of the civil society reflected through by you tonight. Also, as I was mentioning to you, because we are heading to, as we are in Belgium, the Belgian presidency of the Union during the first semester of 2024. But it's very obvious already that the notion of participation, citizens' participation, will be absolutely central in the articulation and the preparation of that presidency. Last but not least, should I say, François, my friend and colleague François Roux, who is a senior advisor, senior fellow, associate fellow of the Egmont Institute. François has had a very long and prestigious diplomatic career, geared mainly towards European affairs. So you have seen all three different phases of your career, this EU environment and then climate agenda unfolding, and you have also a privileged view on, the ongoing discussion and the past and ongoing discussion in Belgium today, and we'll end up with your contribution. So, without further ado, I would now start to give the floor to our panelists. We have agreed that there would be first an introduction by each of them of around 8 to 10 minutes, and then there will be further questions between themselves, and we'll end up with a Q&A session with you. That would last, I would say, 20 to 30 minutes at the end of this session, according to, we are supposed to end, at 7:30, if my memory is correct, around at 7:30. And if I forget to say that, I already mentioned that this will be followed up by a drink and a reception downstairs. Sorry for those following us online, but the reception will not be for you, it will be for those present. Okay, this being said, Solin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jean-Louis. Can you hear me? Wonderful. I always have a voice that carries anyway, especially when I get a little agitated. So I'm sure that's going to happen as we move through this panel. First of all, how wonderful it is to be amongst my Belgian colleagues. We seem to be seeing each other quite a bit these days, and we're not yet in the Belgian presidency. We were with also myself and Adelaide actually earlier last week to open up the Beyond Growth conference with Philippe Lamberts. So it's a real pleasure to see all of the Belgians who are working in this space who are coming out of the woodwork continuously. And I think that's very important. Secondly, my congratulations to the authors and editors and the publishers of this book, Climate Change and the Future of Europe. I think we really are at an absolutely crucial moment when we ask ourselves, how far have we come from our very powerful declarations and belief in a European Green Deal? And of course, Kurt is going to lead us through that path. But the bravery that we've had here in Europe, and I speak to you with an American accent, but I am French-Belgian. I do want to qualify that because often people say, well, who are you? As you say, we, and I feel very European. The bravery that we had here in Europe to show the leadership of ambitious targets on climate change is really at a tipping point, at a moment when we need to shift from the words, the incredible legislation, into action on the ground. So the perspectives coming from the capitals is absolutely fundamental. But I would take it one step further, and of course you would think that that's a natural thing for the co-president of the Club of Rome. Coming after 50 years of our anniversary celebration or commemoration, or wondering, actually, what have we done after the 1972 publication of the Limits to Growth? I think it's fundamental that when we think about climate and we think about now today's polycrisis, we remember that 50 years ago in the Limits to Growth, most of the scenarios already demonstrated that we would be at 450 parts per million. In 1972, they were able to show those scenarios, and that we would, around the period of the 2020s, be faced with deep tipping points which were of the nature of humanity coming up to barriers of the natural boundaries, and very much due to the extractive nature of the economy, the overconsumption, and continued population growth. So when I look at this book, but when I also look at the discourse which we see today, which very much is anchored within how can we decarbonize, we have to think through the systemic and more holistic approach that is necessary in order to bring the capitals across Europe, but also its people and citizens on the journey. We can already see that 3 years ago when myself and Johan Rockström published actually together the Planetary Emergency Plan, and when we asked for an understanding of the interrelationships across the biodiversity system, the climate system, and the human dimension, this was already our call, even before Greta and Adelaide hit the streets, that we needed to understand how we can emerge from emergency. And that understanding was anchored in adopting a holistic approach. Because as my colleagues and friends and peers in most of the world, not the West, often remind me, we are close to carbon apartheid. Carbon apartheid means that the European Green Deal does not adopt a lens of understanding the impact of decarbonization in the European region and what that will do to its partnerships with the rest of the world. What does a real understanding of decolonization mean? What does a real understanding of our relationships and our trade partnerships that we have today in terms of shifting from relationships of dependency or unholy alliances, which is exactly what we've seen with regard to gas? What does that mean in the context of making sure that we bounce forward better together? And that is why, actually, as we all embraced the European Green Deal and we continued to work, myself and my colleagues from the Club of Rome, also with the Potsdam Institute and others, and we've just actually put forward our newest book, Earth for All, A Survival Guide for Humanity, we're very clear, and we already saw, based again on the limits to growth, that it would be equity and the social tipping points that would make it so difficult for us to reach our carbon ambition. And why is that? And we can see it today, because energy poverty and food poverty is already making it difficult for citizens to accept a decarbonized world. Also, because that narrative is often seized into a fear and a negative narrative that decarbonization and energy poverty and food poverty will only be exacerbated as we decarbonize. Hence, we see the growth of populism. Hence, we see the stability issues that we can see already within some of our rural communities or urban communities, starting already with the Gilets jaunes. Hence why we need to think through how we build a narrative of hope that enables Europe's capitals and Europe's governments to work with citizens to demonstrate that decarbonization is the future alongside an equity lens, alongside a reality check of what type of taxation systems we need, of what type of welfare systems we need, of what is the future of work, which actually potentially could be a universal basic income or basic dividend for all, because actually we may not be able to employ everyone. The systemic approach means that you need to unpack the economic, financial, and governance systems that we have today to make sure that they become the underbelly of support for deep decarbonization. And so what this book does is it starts to show some of the reactions, but we'll need to go much further into detail in terms of the next step. The work that we've been doing now through the Club of Rome with our partners has been to better understand what is that next step. In Earth for All, we talk about 5 turnarounds. We clearly indicate that actually, because we have seen now the growth in the growth in wealth, and our index demonstrated that with the growth of wealth, we've seen a dramatic decrease in well-being, because wealth predominantly goes into the hands of a few and is not properly distributed. That big gap will continue to push equity issues, poverty issues, and social tipping points. And without addressing that gap, there is absolutely no way that we will meet our ambitious targets on climate change. So the answer is a well-being model. The answer is understanding, and that is what we will be speaking about collectively next week at the Beyond Growth Conference here at the European Parliament, which is now currently supported by multi-parties coming together to think through if our economic model is broken, and it is, with continuous growth and productivity being the only indicator, rather than addressing new indicators, which move us beyond growth into a real growth scenario, which means economic development for the many rather than the few, understanding that actually today's economy is the first economy that is making this generation the first generation to make less than its parents, the highest amount of suicide and mental illness rates, opioid overdoses in the United States, for example, or dependencies, all of which are pointing to the fact that people are not happy, and yet, supposedly, they are wealthy. Decoupling the wealth from well-being and understanding that true well-being comes from a very different type of economic model, which thus means, from our perspective, you cannot talk about climate change and decarbonization in Europe without understanding a shift in the current economic model. Because we also know, and I'm sure Kurt will speak about this, that the natural resources that we continue to deplete for our productivity model are only going to continuously make us hit a wall and continue to increase our emissions and our impact and our footprint on the planet. So I will finish with the realization today is that Europe was and hopefully will continue to be a leader on climate change policy, and also in understanding that a European Green Deal has to be fair and just. But we now must ensure that in the implementation, because it's going to get tough, we address much more systemic issues. And we really understand that equity, poverty, new governance models, new economic and financial models are fundamental in order to carry us forward. And that technology and just the policy that we have today will not get us to where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I will refrain to do what too many moderators do, that is to immediately comment on the intervention of a panelist, because I'm just here to moderate, but it's going to be very tough for me because you said so many important things which it took a lot of blood listening to you. Kurt, I mean, clearly the ball is now in your court. As I said earlier, the Green Deal has been presented by the Commission, and when it was tabled, very quickly, by the way, after the new Commission took over, as a completely new blueprint for growth, and not only another version of the classical EU environment policy. So do you still, I said that it is still the case, a lot of things done since President von der Leyen took over. Can you just update us on where we are and then share with us how you see the next changes?
Sure, happy to do this, Jean-Louis, and thank you, first of all, for having me here this evening. I remember vividly the event with Egmont in January 2020. The world looks very different from 3 years ago, and I wonder how it will look like in another 3 years, because the pace of change and the depth of change is so big. Secondly, I would want to thank and congratulate the authors of the book, Climate Change and the Future of Europe. It's really very good to have this. I cannot claim I've read everything, but I've read the introduction and the Belgian chapter, because that's really... But I assure you now that I have a hard copy that I will also go through the rest. The book is not only interesting, it's also very useful for us, because we need to know more and more what is happening in their member states, and Sandrine also alluded to this. There was this U.S. congressman, I looked it up, Tip O'Neill, who said in 1932, apparently all politics is local. And that remains very true. But what we see is that increasingly solutions, especially solutions to global problems, are increasingly European. And we really need to be better at linking up the global scale of solutions with the local scale of the politics. And that is something that is really running through our work across the Commission now. We have a system of country desks. Every DG is now much more attuned to what is happening in the different member states. And that is a very good thing. And it gives us a lot of ammunition and insights to better sell our policies because the reception of these policies are very, very different from one member state to another. And even, if I may say, Francois, within one member state, like the Belgian one, we are indeed in a planetary crisis. That's obvious. But we were, and we still are, as well as in an economic crisis. If we want to sustain our European social market economy model with the values that we have, we need to sustain growth. But it cannot be a model of growth that is based on fossil fuels, that is based on wasting resources. It has to be a new model of growth. And that is also what the European Green Deal was about. One of the big problems we have in industrialized countries is a lack of productivity growth. That comes from a lack of innovation. 2/3 of growth in an industrialized continent like ours comes from innovation. It's that innovation that we're lacking, and the European Green Deal was also meant as a kind of innovation shock to our system. And I think we can say, in all fairness, that this is happening. We see a lot of innovation, we see a lot of investment happen, but not enough yet. We need to grow much further. I think maybe subject to Sandrine's view of this, but I think the European Green Deal is the closest we have got to a plan for a systemic transformation of an economy or a society. We can do much better. We can integrate and should integrate much more all the different policy agendas. I take that entirely. But it is probably the closest we have got to something that looks like planning and operating a systemic transformation. And I think what has been understood, thanks to the European Green Deal, is that climate action is about much more than cutting emissions. Obviously, it is about looking at fossil fuels, at decarbonizing your energy system, but it also has to deal with resources, as Sandrine was saying, and with protection of nature and biodiversity. And we have tried to put all this in one overall blueprint for becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050. The climate neutrality is and was then meant to be our core mission. But in order to get there, we need to work on a lot of other elements as well of the political agenda. And I think it's also fair to say, but friends and colleagues can differ in opinion, that since 2019 we have stayed the course on the European Green Deal and especially on the climate goal. We were confronted very, very quickly after 2 months in office with the pandemic, when there were a couple of leaders, both in economy and in politics, that said, well, this pandemic is so huge. Let's pause a little bit with this whole green business. Let's take care of the economy. We didn't do that. Actually, to the contrary, we came out stronger for the Green Deal after the pandemic with Next Generation EU, 800 billion euros that we mobilized, of which more than 40% will be invested in greening the economy. We then had the very regrettable, dreadful war in Ukraine. And again, for a moment, just a slight moment, there was the fear that maybe we need to change policies. That didn't happen. We doubled down on our clean energy transition objectives, increasing the renewables targets, energy efficiency targets. We put forward a very ambitious plan of saving energy, and we have saved close to 20% of gas consumption, diversifying, but also, as I said, investing in renewables. And lately, I think a big shock to our system, certainly in political economy terms, has been the IRA, which is a wake-up call for Europe to make sure that we get our industrial strategy up and running. And that was the missing piece, really, in our whole approach. And I think it's fair to say that in 2019, when we launched the European Green Deal, many told us, "You are alone in this." How naive that Europe will solve the world's problem. Today, I think it's fair to say the whole world is on this trajectory of decarbonization. And we are actually at the risk of being overtaken by some, which is maybe not a bad thing for the climate. It's maybe a little bit more challenging for Europe. So where are we today? I personally believe that the Green Deal and the whole green transformation is irreversible. I don't see a next Commission leadership coming in and trying to revert all this. This is impossible. Also because we have the European Climate Law, which is, if you think of it, a quite extraordinary event that 27 member states and the European Parliament have democratically agreed to bind themselves to an outcome which is very specific in 30 years' time. That is quite extraordinary, that a whole continent has been doing this. And this is no our compass, of course. And it also means, and we feel this in the Commission, that climate is pervading everything. It's not only pervading everything, it gives direction to much of what the Commission is doing. And you're right, you mentioned in your introduction, there are many, many priorities. And the Commission has to take care of so many challenges and needs. But climate is certainly something that runs through a lot of the initiatives we are taking. We now have the Fit for 55 package of legislation agreed, 13 pieces of legislation. One important one is still missing. There are several, but one important one, which is the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is crucial. Again, that's where the local politics come in, because there are 2 or 3 member states for which touching your houses is extremely sensitive, as sensitive as touching your food. And I look especially at the countries in the South. So that we still need to have agreed. But I think the Fit for 55 package is there. What now matters for us is what I call the 3 I's: implementation, industry, and international. Implementation, because we really need to get all this. The easy, hard part of the job has been done with finding agreements on Fit for 55. The hard part is no start. In a context where member states are overwhelmed by all these rules and requirements coming from Brussels, and there is a certain green fatigue coming, and we need to be understanding. We don't need to concede to this, but we need to be understanding. And there's going to be years of work with the member states, but also with industries, with all kinds of sectors, to explain and keep the motivation for implementing this. Because we are quite confident that we will achieve our target of at least minus 55% CO2 emission reduction by 2030. We have the laws in place and the tools. But we need to do that in a way that we keep everyone. Secondly, industry. I mentioned the IRA. That is a big challenge and opportunity for us. Because the worst that could happen is that we will create a massive market for clean tech and green products in Europe, but that the goods will come from other parts. If that happens, we will not be able to sustain our climate ambition. So we really have to succeed in fostering our industrial strategy for the green transition. And thirdly, as I said, international. We now need to get the rest of the world on board. We can develop that more, if you like, in a question and answer session. But we only represent about 7% of global CO2 emissions. So even if we succeed with our targets, which we will, it will only make a dent. Except that we can show leadership, of course, with demonstrating that a fair and just transition is possible. And in doing all this, we need to have the right narrative in place so that people feel and know that this green transition is not restricting your comfort, that it is not a question of going to live back in the caves, but this is action for a better future. The challenges I see in this is there are several, but there are two that I want to mention, and they came up also in Sandrine's comments. One is the role of nature in all this. That is still where we have a big gap in the understanding of how nature and biodiversity is essential, indispensable in meeting also climate objectives, because it is true, as Frans Timmermans is saying, we have a risk of biodiversity ecosystem collapse. And if that happens, we will not win or succeed with our climate agenda neither. And the second one is solidarity. Call it the social and fair transition, call it whatever you like, but it's really showing solidarity within society, across member states, and with the rest of the world, which is also wanting the developed world to take care of their problems. So nature and solidarity is really two of the big challenges we see in the years ahead.
Turning for Kurt, you are still the same clear and pedagogical self. Thanks a lot for having, be so open and candid about what has been achieved and what remains to be done. Adelaide, as a founder of the Youth for Climate movement in Belgium, you are already seen as the spokesperson of those who claim that it's not enough. So we've heard that a lot has been done in difficult circumstances because Kurt was right, expressing that the world today is quite different from what it used to be 3 years ago. So where are you on this now? Not you personally, but I mean the news that you incarnate, that you are embodying, that you are representing. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. I'll bring this closer. Yeah, I was near like, yes, please. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. It already shows how much the youth movement has worked so hard to come around the table and be part of the conversation. So thank you very much. Congratulations also to the authors again of the book. It's great also for young people to have that. And I hope for a maximum of professors to include this book in our courses at universities. I am still a student. I am finishing my bachelor in politics and in social sciences here in Brussels. And the people speaking just before me could be my parents or my professors. I feel like her mother, by the way. Yeah. So I will try to get to their level. Let's see. But it's okay. I'm here to represent youngsters. I am 22, and when I started building a maximum of mobilization, I mean, I say I again. I was not alone. I one of my best friends is Anuna de Wever, and she was actually the one who launched the first strike here in Belgium. And of course, one of my good friends now, Greta Thunberg, you know her, started this and inspired us to start striking. So since 2019, and this was a really important moment for young people because there was this opportunity, this possibility to mobilize, to organize, first through strikes, but we also worked very closely with many scientists across Europe, but also here in Belgium. We co-wrote a book also with Sandrine Dixson-decleve, Esmeralda de Belgique, and my friend Anuna. So there's also this very important part for young movements of experts. And we know that the reason why we went in the streets is not because we are not patient and we really want everything to move. It's because we base ourselves and our demands on scientific facts. And this is why young people have been in the streets and why they will continue to organize as many different ways as possible in order to be the social pressure, external social pressure to political and economical institutions to make sure that the move will be faster. After the young people massive mobilization in 2019, what we have seen is this Green Deal on the table on the European level. That was very important for young people to see. This is a target that is present. It should go much further as a target. The target of you talked about the European climate law, which must be even more ambitious, but it's there. And that's crucial because we can base ourselves on this Green Deal to make sure that we will be constantly aligned, that all our politics will be aligned to the target that we have given ourselves. And actually, before the Green Deal, we had an international target that we gave ourselves, which is the Paris Agreement. And that is also thanks to that agreement that young people have mobilized, thanks to that agreement that the European Green Deal is also on the table. And young people and the movements base themselves also on this Paris Agreement, limiting global warming well below 2 degrees and not forgetting about the 1.5. That should be our targets. And that's where we still see a lot of incoherence. So what happened with the young people's movement is that it's not only in Belgium, it has been worldwide, everywhere, at the same moment, young people striking with the same message, whatever the political sphere, whatever the cultural habits that we can have in different countries, we were there with the same message and mobilizing. And I think this is the biggest gain of this young people's movement, is that we go beyond languages, we go beyond cultural differences, and we go beyond borders, which is also a strength of the EU. And that's why young people, I think this young people's movement is so strong and will be so strong for a long time still, is that we were able to cross these borders and to align and to create coalitions between young people across the world while having the same targets and the same demands. Now, today, this young movement continues. We multiply ourselves, we diversify in the way we do our actions. We do this through working constantly with experts, still striking, walking in the streets, going to festivals, going to schools. We do a lot of lobbying also. And obviously, also, as you may have seen it, there is more and more civil disobedience. This is something that we cannot ignore. It's very present in movements, and it will only grow. And that is also because young people are more and more scared. And I'm not saying it because I see it around myself. I see it because also studies have shown it. There is eco-anxiety in my generation more than any other generations, and we have to take that into account. There is 59% of young people in the world who are extremely worried about climate change. There's 56% that think that humanity is condemned. That is really sad for a new generation, but it's reality, and we need to take that into account. And what we do see is that the best response to eco-anxiety is action. Mobilization is a way to be integrated in the conversation, in the debate, in the decision-making process. And that's probably what I'm still scared of, and what I still see around is that there is still a lack of integration of the younger generation in the political debates. I'm very honored to be the special advisor of the executive vice president of Frans Timmermans. And it allows us to make a really important bridge between European climate movements and Frans Timmermans and the European Commission. It's crucial. And I love this initiative, and we've been doing that for 3 years. But we need to see this way more. I cannot hold the movement's pressure to share that to the entire EU institutions. So we need to see structural integration. That is still what is missing. We need to give attention to these youth worries and demands that are basically most of the time based on science. And we need to see concrete action in political decisions that are aligned to the Paris Agreement. Not only to the Green Deal, to the Paris Agreement. That is our first agreement that we made on an international level. Young people are still worried because we see billions going every day to fossil fuels, because we see still billions also going to a massive industrial farming, because we see policies that still supports fossil fuel, as mentioned, that they are green. So our energy transition is something that we do not still see as something that is sustainable and respectful. And therefore, young people still have demands. They have demands, like I said, to be aligned to the Paris Agreement. They have demands and they are including social justice more and more in their demands. Young people's movements, they do not talk only about CO2 anymore, just like the Green Deal is starting to do so. It's not about CO2. It's about a structural change. It's about a way that we have decided to live and organize ourselves on this planet that is not sustainable for the entire society. And actually, we have been the privileged ones who were able to live like this, and now realizing that it is destructing. And so it's about also recognizing our historical responsibility and recognizing our privileges. And that's probably why it's taking so long for us to change. The social justice aspect is so crucial. You talked about solidarity. It's part of it. But we're going to have to go so deep in our roots of the way we have decided to organize ourselves that it will be hard for us. We need to be humble. We need to take a step back, and we need to accept that maybe we made mistakes and maybe we have to organize ourselves differently. That's easier said maybe for younger generations than for older ones. I don't know. We need a shift, therefore, also in our economical models. I'm so inspired by many academics who bring forward alternatives. I had the honor to meet Kate Raworth, thanks to you, Sandrine, and many others that we will meet next week at the Beyond Growth Conference. This is very inspiring for many youth, and I hope that many of young people will get inspired to build many more alternatives concretely that can be translated in our society today. I think the main view and the main goal of our young people's movement is to make sure that we show that young people are legitimate. We are here, we are already affected, and we will be the most affected, and therefore we need to be part of the conversation. And our worries need to be taken into account. And I hope that right now, as young citizens, our responsibility is to show other young citizens that we are legitimate and that if the door is closed, we'll open it. I'm trying to read what I wrote. I can't read myself. Yes, I just wrote that we also have a crucial role to play as young citizens. I'm not saying that all young people around Europe are screaming to be part of the conversation. Obviously, we have a huge amount of work to also do with our generation. I mean, we have been born in this way of organizing ourselves in this system. We don't know anything else than what exists around us and what school and publicities have pushed us to consume and to act in this way. But there is a part of the generation that is willing to question it, that is willing to be part of the conversation, and that is probably the best allies that we have in order to bring in all this other part of my generation that is not yet there. So I hope with this that the young Youth for Climate movement will still have a crucial role to play, a bigger one, and that we will be able to get all these other young people to include them structurally in all conversation on the EU level. Thank you.
Adelaide, what you said made me think that we might have a live test of your expectation in this very country next year, when for the first time youngsters between 16 and 18 will be authorized to vote for a European election. It'll be very interesting to follow and see how they position themselves in the political debate. François, so there was a reference to the Belgian experience. Maybe you want to elaborate on that. but maybe you want also to take a maybe somewhat more broad historical perspective, taking into account what you have seen unfolding at the EU level. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. Thank you to TEPSA for organizing this event. Thank you, Eva. And hello to Jim, hoping that he gets better soon. I'm going to follow the subjects you proposed I should tackle, namely I will say something on the Belgian chapter, and then follow on with the dynamic on EU negotiations, and end with an answer to the question, is climate change an overarching issue or an isolated policy area? So to start with Belgium, of course, many people say that Belgium is EU, but only a little bit smaller. And in fact, what the Belgium's policy, climate policy, reflects in many ways what the trends are, and I would summarize them as follows. First, a high degree of awareness, but at the same time, disappointing performances. Something was mentioning the implementation issue. We're in the middle of it as far as Belgians are concerned, and in fact, we're still pretty worried about reaching the goals of 2050. The government's position is that we would make it, but some are still doubting. Second, we are a country which had to make very difficult energy choices. And like many other European countries, we took measures that could be considered as setbacks for climate change policy. For instance, prolonging the nuclear plants and building gas power stations. Third, we witness a high, and I would even say a spectacular involvement of civil society. Adelaide just mentioned it. It is very striking, and also something you did mention, the link between the youth, the academic world, and politicians, which is something rather new to be followed. And finally, fourth element, a governance problem, and Kurt, you mentioned it, north versus south. 3 regions, 3 climate plans, not very coherent, and no integrated vision. So these 4 elements I mentioned explain a little bit why in the official negotiations, Belgium tends to be rather quiet. And this is in high contrast with the society, with Belgian citizens that are expecting a lot about climate negotiations, and believe that the EU should take a leading role in this debate. Turning now to the dynamic of negotiations and to the experience I have in this field, I used to have, because now it's already almost 3 years since I left the circles. I would first of all say that the European Green Deal proposal, meaning the original proposal by the Commission, was probably the only possible strategy to facilitate the transition towards net zero in 2050 without killing the economic growth. But I would also remind that, and we should not forget this, that the surprising ambition of this proposal is linked to the approval by the European Parliament of Mrs. von der Leyen. Had she not been very courageous and very ambitious, not only in the text, but also in nominating the Vice President who deals with climate change, things might have turned differently. And I'm mentioning this because I was listening to what Kurt said, saying it's irreversible. Well, yes, I wish it was, but in the meantime, what we are going to face in 2024 is elections. And climate will be definitely a major theme for both camps, I mean, Eurosceptics and the others. And unfortunately, when you see negotiations within the Council of Ministers, or even European Council, or in the Parliament, you see a very active lobbying of fossil fuels, lobbies, or just powers that think that the status quo should be maintained. So comparison, I would be a little bit cautious on the outcome of these negotiations. And in the meantime, as the book shows, and as Jean-Louis was saying in the beginning, there's not such thing as a unified European approach to climate change. And this is still worrying, because if Europe wants to stay in the lead, commitments are not enough, and the data must show the rhetoric. I could go on here with the international subject, but I think we will tackle that later on with the questions. Now, responding to this question you put forward, I think it was you, Eva, is climate change an overarching issue, or is it still an isolated area? Answering that question means tackling the Ukraine issue, because I think it is a game changer. Why is it a game changer? Because the invasion has triggered a convergence, and I think it was mentioned by previous speakers, a convergence on various notions related to security. You said the young generation is afraid. Well, security is overall. Security is energy security, military security, financial security, climate. So the short answer to that question would be that climate is part of an overarching debate on security. But I would like now to make 2 points on the impact of the Ukrainian war on the climate change issue. One is a little bit worrying, and this is because of the war. The European Green Deal seems to have gone beyond its initial goal of reducing emissions. It became an instrument to ensure sovereignty, especially in the field of energy. And therefore, the risk you see here is that the energy imperative is prevailing over the climate imperative. And I mean, this is my personal point of view. I find this a little bit worrying, because if we switch to, let's say, electric cars, you will only transfer the problems you had with fossil fuels to other material. The second issue I wanted to mention here, and this is rather positive, the fact that what neither scientific warnings or diplomatic negotiations or even the growing concerns of citizens had succeeded in obtaining, namely a sustainable reduction in consumption, what we call energy sobriety or energy sufficiency, well, the Ukraine war made it happen. And this is extremely important, because I would refer back to what Sandrine was saying, the fact that sobriety is not a taboo anymore. And the fact that reducing consumption through efficiency, of course, but also through frugality, as a form of frugality, could become the trademark of the EU point of view on climate change, and could also be the first stone to build this new model we were talking about, namely a new economic model which would be safe for climate. I will stop here.
Thank you, Francois. I don't think that we are going to go for another round of intervention of the panelists. They said a lot in their initial intervention. We'll now open the floor for Q&A, your question and answers, and then debate with you. And if you allow me, this time I will, get out of my moderator position and maybe start initiating the debate and the discussion by making 4 comments. The first one could relate to what you said, Sandrine. Well, as many people of my generation, I'm a natural-born Marxist. And therefore, I cannot refrain from thinking that we are now ahead of another major center-periphery challenge. It does not, might have to do with the so-called global north and global south, but let's look at the situation inside. We have this triple transition, which is the green, the digital, and the demographic transition. And we might end up having some part of the EU losing on the 3 dimension. I mean, backsliding on climate, backsliding on the digital, and backsliding on the demographic. How do you assess that? And is there a response from that point of view? The second would have to do with what you and Kurt very eloquently raised, the implementation gap. I would here refer to my friend, many of you knows him, Fabian Zuleg from the EDC, who is hammering out that the EU risks dying because of this implementation gap, not only in climate change policy, but in a whole range of policies. I was struck, you referred to the 3 I's. It happens that I was recently in an informal discussion with many representatives of the business sector, dealing precisely with, all the ongoing legislative effort or regulation concerning climate change and industry. And the feeling was, okay, we think that it goes in the right direction, but we do not understand it. And we do not understand it has to do also with the machinery inside the Commission. Who is doing what in the Commission between the different DG, whether it is trade, competition, policy, your DG, growth, and others. So, the question of the implementation gap that you raise yourself. Then the question of the narrative. Here, you said it yourself, it's of the essence. It happens that as a retired official, I'm attending a lot of meetings and think tank meetings now. I was in one where Vice President Timmermans was, and he expressed himself as candidly as you did today. And he was referring to, there was a quote from Antonio Guterres in the foreword of the book, and he said, okay, Guterres is a friend of mine, but I don't agree with his narrative. It's good to ring the alarm bell, but we should stop ringing them too loud. We are achieving things. We are achieving things. We are reaching some goals. We see the first positive indication of that the effort will deliver. So we might now have to turn to a somewhat more reassuring narrative about, okay, we are making it. We are in the process of making it. So no time for complacency because, there is a reward on our collective investment. And then would be my fourth and last point, which would be exactly about what François said about the irreversible nature of the Green Deal. You're absolutely right, Kurt. The Green Deal survived both the pandemic and the Russian war of aggression. But these were unprecedented shock. Are we not confronted now with a much more invisible and random threat, which is the kind of green fatigue that you referred to yourself? Not that much at the level of the industry, but at the level of you, us, our father, our brothers, our sisters. Think, fine, give us a break. And again, there is this classical reference, how could not I quote it, the end of the month and the end of the world, saying, okay, right, we know that we are in the right direction, but please don't push us too much. Don't push us too much. We have to be able to cope with it. So I would start with these 4 comments, whoever can take it, but maybe also turn to you. Are questions from your side? Comments? Maybe you could help. Yes, please.
It's not that's yet, I think. Okay, okay. And first place, great that you organized this because it's very interesting, and I must say different views are very good. And I was very pleased with François that he had a little bit a critical position on all this, I must say, because otherwise we feel ourselves a little bit too much preaching in the same church. And we are part of that church, of course. No, that was great. And first, another observation I want to make also for Alaïd and of Kurt. I think effectively with Kurt that you made the Commission and Parliament and Member States adopted the climate law of 2050. I think that's underestimated the importance of that. It's very important. That I think is the main thing, and people should realize that, and people should really think about it, because that is the framework under which everything will be happening. In that same line, I want to say, when I'm missing, no one is referring here to the judge. The judges in the past period have been very helpful for everything which has been to do with climate change. Without judges, I think we would not be there where we are now, actually, nor at national level, nor having the security what the European Court of Justice has been doing. and especially for Adelaide, because she makes it a generational question. In the jurisprudence of the judges, of the tribunals, it's a very important element nowadays. The generational imminent danger. If you see, for example, the German Bundesverfassungsgericht, where it said no to the German legislation introduced for climate change, that is not enough, has to be redone, because the duty, the burden will be on the young people, and so you have to come up with a better plan. So I think that's an important element of the whole discussion, effectively, which is approaching the irreversibility of all this. It is more or less written out in concrete, what we are doing. So as an important element of that, my concern is a bit also of what François was saying. If you see now in the member states, and it's not only about the implementation, but our politicians are not all, let's put it like that, of the level of that they want and can and should convince their populations. I mean, I see it now. Of course, we have in the Netherlands very serious, I'm out of that, and the Netherlands, a serious problem with the farmers. This is spreading out over different and new elements. And you see it also in European Parliament coming up for the new elections. So I think also there has to be done much more than we are doing now to convince then elements of the national politics and European politics, because otherwise we will be in a very dangerous period. So that's to all of you, but especially to Adelaide. Keep it on, keep it on, keep it on. Never give up, hang in the streets, stop the cars after the windbird. That's it, you will be.
Okay, any other question for the floor, or do we maybe the panelists the opportunity to react to this first set of comments, and then we'll come back to other questions so that we can start thinking about what you would like to ask. Whoever, please. Celine?
Sure, I'm happy to start. And excellent reflections. Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. On the backsliding, I think that you point out something that for me is very important. We are very good at putting in place the policy, at getting it adopted, and forgetting about the tensions. And there is a deep tension that you very clearly raise. I wouldn't say as much between the digital, the climate, and the demographic. I would actually say the tension is more between the climate, in some cases, the biodiversity, and the social element. On the digital, the only thing that I would say is that, and this is what I actually say in the chair role that I feel very honored to hold for the European Commission's Research and Innovation DG, is CEAR, where we speak about the economic and societal impacts of research and innovation. And through our thinking, especially also on the digital, but also on the future of work, what we continuously indicate is exactly what Kurt said. Let us not forget our deep, deep European value system. Let us not, and I grew up in California, let us not go down the California route. Let us not go down the US route. Because what has happened is that we are talking about the Internet of Things, and we have forgotten to talk about the Internet of People. We have absolutely decoupled the beauty of the digital age from its servicing people, planet, and prosperity. And yet it can be enhanced as an instrument for good. Now, yes, we see it. Actually, in Africa, we see much more the positives, whether we look at the access to mobile phones and then mobile banking, which has really created a digital revolution in Africa and emancipated so many people. We should think about digital in the same way. And let us not forget that the head of AI for Google has stepped down very clearly because of his fear of what he created, which is a little bit the Einstein syndrome. And so we get so caught up. I mean, I call it the Tesla effect because I sit on the BMW board. They're always looking backwards. And I keep on saying to them, be proud of your engineering prowess. Be proud of the fact that you actually can and will build a car that does not create emissions, diversify, become a new mobility producer. Don't follow Tesla. We have to stop, and this is the IRA effect as well. We're now scrambling because everyone is telling us that we will not be able to compete. The IRA is a program which is very much put in place, and yes, it has wonderful green undertones, but it was very much put in place to ensure that it stops and has a response to China. And we need to be very careful that we get caught up in this anxiety. So that brings up a little bit your geopolitical conversation as well that we were supposed to have. So I would say that if we're going to get better, and this is part of our compass work and what Janusz Potocznik, former commissioner, and I tried to do through the compass was, let's work with the commission. We are now getting to the sticky places. This is when it gets tough. And I always say the tough get going when it gets tough. The others sit behind and watch what we call the couch potatoes. We need to think through. We cannot allow for European politicians to get caught with their pants down. We need to enable European politicians to be proud of the European Green Deal, but we need to give them the tools in the toolbox. That means we need to be ingenious, we need to be smarter, but most of them are actually just quite practical. New governance models that means you don't subsidize what you shouldn't be subsidizing. Ensuring that we actually link up our policy. Ensuring that we start to really value the champions of the new economy. And placing a value on that, whether it be through Horizon funding and new research and innovation programs, whether it be changing our educational programs. Just last week, you must have, all those of you who are here in Belgium, heard that there were students in the streets who are studying agriculture because there is not a regenerative agriculture course in Belgium. What the heck? So this is how we unstuck ourselves. We need to think through a systemic approach, which means our educational system needs to change. We need to teach, as Adelaide continuously says to me, why are we not getting taught about the complexities of life so that we can become the solution providers? And we need to link that to our research and innovation programs so we create the right types of programs. And the last thing I'll say is the element of time. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have another 50 years. So we need to really put in place those short-term levers that are evidence-based. As Adelaide said, we follow the science, but let's make sure then the science is really being reflected in the way in which we make policy, and let's make sure that then as well we integrate that into the research and innovation programs so that we can have short-term turnarounds for long-term systems change that meets our ambitious targets and makes sure that this becomes the legacy of Europe, but takes into consideration its lineage, which means you realize those unholy alliances, you think through the new partnerships that are going to become global partnerships of change, and you don't isolate your friends or create more stranded assets by deciding to have more coal, invest more coal outside of Europe while you try to green yourself here.
Thank you. Maybe a few quick telegraphic responses to your comments, Jean-Louis. First, on European cohesion. I absolutely agree. This is very, very important. But let's not forget that a lot is already happening. Next Generation EU is probably the biggest effort in history of ensuring that there is sufficient cohesion, that we leave no one behind. We're experimenting with just transition mechanisms. So again, the same thing. And also from a climate perspective, we continuously look at the social dimension of this. The Social Climate Fund, which we will fund with revenues from ETS, 86 billion euros, will come into play as of 2025. For the first time ever at European level, we have defined what is energy poverty and transport poverty. And we are forcing member states to finally do something, because a lot of them talk about it, but they don't do it. If they don't want to have access to these funds, they will need to prove to us that they will do something about it. So, but we need to do more, and that will be one of the big challenges for the next Commission in designing the multidimensional financial framework of 2027. Clear. Implementation gap. We all feel this, but let us remind ourselves that as far as energy and climate is concerned, we have met all the targets so far. The 2020 targets for climate, renewable energy, etc., they're all met. We overachieved them. There's only one member state that didn't meet the renewable energy target, which is France. For the rest, everyone is meeting all the targets. The targets in Repower EU, we have all met them. We have overachieved the saving of gas. No one would have guessed this. We said reduce electricity by 15%, we did it. And that is because everything or most of what we're doing is based on impact assessment. So we come with very ambitious policies, but we know that with sufficient political will and organization, they are doable, they are realizable. And that's where indeed organization comes in. I'm speaking as a bureaucrat, of course. We in the Commission, thank you, Satwe. In the Commission, we're learning the lessons every day of what it means to work across policies. We have task forces like SG Recover, etc. We still need to see the same movement on the part of member states in the European Parliament and in the Council. That's indeed an issue. And we need to explain much better what we're doing, why we're doing it, and especially what is the cost of non-action. Because many people forget what it would mean if we don't do these policies. That's where the narrative comes in. I agree with Frans Timmermans. We should not overdo the alarm and the emergency calls because people get rapidly used to this. And either they fall in a kind of climate doomsayers, which doesn't help us. And then you have youths going to the climate psychologists in Sweden, for example. Or you have those that are climate delayers that say, well, it's all not that bad, let's wait a little bit, technology will come that will solve it all. We need to be climate doers and show that we can put up policies, realize them, and have results. And that's the best thing that can help, I think. That's why I am quite confident, Francois, about the irreversibility of the climate agenda.
Yeah, sure.
But I stress of the climate agenda. I'm less confident about what it means, for example, for nature and biodiversity, some other parts of the European. And obviously, we're coming into a very difficult period, implementation, but also elections coming up. Parties need to position themselves. So it is normal that you see this polarization and that certain politicians will gain visibility by opposing certain parts, where they feel that there is a certain appetite among the public for opposing. I think that is natural. I don't see anyone contesting the climate agenda. Again, because the cost of non-action is so clear. We have seen that only 2 member states have opposed the Fit for 55, Poland and Hungary. But if you know that the country that made the biggest gain in wind energy last year was Poland. The country that is benefiting most from the green transition and putting all its money on it is Hungary, because the battery production is increasing enormously in Hungary and the electric vehicles, etc. So there's a lot of grandstanding here, which of course we need to take into account. But in terms of climate, I'm quite confident. But other parts of the Green Deal, there I think there's the fatigue growing and a little bit of too much is too much. And then I want to quickly respond to just your comment on the judges. Very important. That's why European law is so important. That's why the European climate law, Gives Mikoch, in September 2022, said that she sees if there is a reason for treaty change, it would be to introduce intergenerational justice and solidarity. That's for her the reason to open the treaty. She clearly said this, and that is because then the courts and the whole legal and hopefully also the policy system follows that. Because the treaty, after all, is our closest thing to a constitution.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief. So many things I want to react on. But I think first on the generational aspect, I've been speaking a lot about the younger generation because this is more what I can put forward today. But it's very important for me to mention that this is not a generational combat fight or challenge or whatever we call it. It's really a societal change that's coming. So obviously the younger generation has a responsibility and will be touched, but they are not the only ones who will be acting. And this is actually what we have wrote in our book that we wrote with Dixson-decleve. Yeah, Dixson-decleve. It's like, it's our goed stellen. Esmeralda de Belgique en Nuda. And it's really important because we cannot make climate change a generational fight. That's super important. And that's why as climate movements, we actually work all the time with the grandparents of climate and with obviously also many other NGOs and movements from many different generations. But it's super important for us to show this. On terms of the narrative, it's crucial for me to hear, obviously, that France wants to put forward a more positive narrative for people to get engaged. Yeah, but at the same time, alarming the bell is not what is creating eco-anxiety. Because what is creating eco-anxiety is facts. It's the fact that we are having a huge differences between scientific facts and everyday actions, political actions and economical actions. So create what is worrying people, what is making them maybe not acting and seeing psychologists, is the difference between our political policies and the science. It's not the narrative. It's not the narrative because people will find this alarming narrative somewhere else, even if the EU changes it, because it's facts. And so I think what's really important for us to put as a narrative is, yes, it's bad, for real. That's what science is saying. We're not there. We're going to reach the 1.5 degree of warming before 2030. I'm not saying it. The IPCC is saying it. So that's bad. But what are we going to do about what is bad? We already have stuff on the table. Apparently it's not enough. So what can, as citizens, we can do? What responsibility can we take? And I think the best narrative is the engagement narrative. We don't have to reassure people. If you reassure people, you're going to let them think that it's all going okay. And so they're not going to act. I can tell you, this is what I see. If people tell me it's fine, we have technologies, we'll be fine, they're not acting, they're not changing anything, they're not rethinking, they're not questioning, they're not critical about what's around them. And so I think really the narrative is making sure that we stick to reality and then showing people the different path that they can take depending on the different responsibilities that they have in society. And showing that path is probably, this narrative is probably the hardest one to put in place because it's hard. But we have to put that narrative in place. This is the one that will actually bring structural change and irreversible change. And this narrative again brings forward responsibility and therefore privileges, because they go together. If you have more privileges, you have more responsibility. We don't all have the same responsibility. And so I think this is also a narrative that we have to put forward. And it is then going to bring forward the social justice aspects. We don't all have the same responsibility. And also in the narrative, we should not only talk about individual responsibility, but talk about institutional responsibility. And so all these different factors, I think we have to include them in our narrative. And then the last thing on judges, thank you so much for bringing that up. It's obviously something that's a lot of citizens are full of justice in order to move forward in tackling climate change. And we have seen this in Belgium. And I mean, the outcome is obviously also that we're not doing good enough, right? In Belgium, our 4 governments have been put to court and they have lost. So citizens have won in saying that we are not aligned to the Paris Agreement. They are not, I'm not saying the right way, but they are not putting enough policies on the table in order to safeguard the security of their citizens. That happened also in Germany and in many other countries. But Germany is interesting because the outcome of that was that Germany had to raise their targets. So it's actually the court's case that allowed Germany to go further on their climate neutrality targets. So it is obviously a tool that's interesting for citizens to use, and it keeps on being used. But it is a very long-term, obviously, tool. It's not very direct, but it has very big impacts. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, François.
Well, quickly, just to remind that, what's very striking in the EU way of dealing with climate change is the institutional approach. I mean, if you compare to the United States, for instance, it was different. And if I were to give advice to the next commissioner or the next president of the commission, don't worry, Kurt, it won't happen.
We can take that in cards.
I think there are three weaknesses. There are three weaknesses that one has to deal with. The first one is dealing with the past, dealing with the weight of the past. And CAP is the problem. It has to be tackled courageously and properly, and the judges will help. That's the weakness number one. Weakness number two is the limited powers of the Commission. Not when it when dealing with environment, but when dealing with fiscal aspects, social aspects of this new well-being society we're trying to build. And therefore, maybe a treaty change will be necessary. And then third, I would call it distance. And I agree with you. I mean, the narrative is fine, but the real issue here is, as long as climate change issue is a dialogue between citizens and experts and governments experts, we won't go very far. There's a distance problem, and I think it is more urgent to deal with this distance problem than building some sort of a new narrative.
Last round of question, comments. I see two hands being raised. Okay, there we go. 3 hands. Okay, right.
Thanks a lot, and sorry for insisting. I want to thank all of you because this was so enriching, and I really enjoyed the diversity of the different voices complementing each other, also within Belgium. So I will zoom in onto the local and focus on the part that François Roux mostly talked about. I haven't read the chapter about Belgium, but so you mentioned that Belgium was sort of a mirror of the trends, the global trends. So it sort of sounds like we have all the global problems to deal with climate change, and then some more. So yes, we have problems of governments, implementation, equity, and so on. But I would like to maybe look for some positive notes in all this and focus on opportunities maybe, because we've discussed weaknesses, obstacles, challenges, but maybe there are also some opportunities for Belgium. So I would like to ask if you see some alleyways for Belgium to shine its ambition to tackle climate change, and also where you see them. Would it be where would Belgium be able to lead, to drive, to find some consensus on some aspects, be it political, be it on innovation with the offshore hydrogen, or being involvement of civil society? So this is a question addressed to everybody, of course, not only to François. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. The gentleman behind you. No, but again, let's say the 3 questions. Let's say the 3 questions. So there were 3 hands raised. So your hand and the hand of the gentleman behind you. So please go ahead.
Little bit from experience, long-term experience in innovation. Congratulations with this book. Just to keep it quick. Very long time we're dealing with the Commission and European policies of sustainability and also pollution prevention. What I see a little bit sometimes currently as an issue is that it seems, particularly also in fund distribution, that a lot of times there's particular interest for very large actors, like for example in aviation. There are a lot of ideas now to have cleaner aviation, but then each time it's come back to the industrial part of the Commission. And who is it? It's always the same parties. And I think there are right now a lot of very innovative ideas about to have low carbon aviation, but it's just impossible to get in because the small actors, they are not paid attention to. For example, DG Research then says, well, we have set our priorities, and the priorities are set by the industrial partners. So that's maybe one item. Sometimes small is also beautiful. What way could we promote the beauty of small solutions? And the second point is, I noticed also in this debate and in my own thinking a lot of times that a lot of sustainability ideas are very much focused from a European or North American viewpoint, and particularly now in dealing with other entities like Africa, but also Latin America, which we are doing the last 5 or 6 years. I see that locally there are sometimes very beautiful solutions, but because a lot of the ideas about sustainability are very northern-centric, they are not taken up. While they could be very social inclusive. For example, a very concrete example, you're dealing with Ghana, and in Ghana there's a lot going on in the forestry sector. And there's a lot of ideas also for sustainability, also from European institutions and American institutions about how forestry in Ghana should take place. And that is done also a lot of times from a very northern viewpoint, with very large solutions that do not benefit the local economy, and particularly not the small enterprises. And it was, to my own surprise, a very beautiful item we heard, actually, because we wanted ourselves a product with drone surveillance and forestry. And what did we found in a couple of regions of Ghana, that before a lot of forestry was done by small companies and by very small local populations. And then the solution was actually very well managed small-scale forestry, because on some days, and they call that taboo days, it was not allowed to cut trees, or on some days and some weeks, there were taboo days or weeks where you would not catch the fish in the river. And those kind of instruments sometimes, they work better than, like solutions that are kind of thought of by people outside from Ghana, which maybe from a rational technical viewpoint are the perfect solution, but which actually completely do not connect in an efficient way to the local situation. So that is maybe the second point is, how could we also for the younger generations, how could we promote also this non-Europe or non-American viewpoint, which sometimes has very creative solutions. So it's maybe something food for thought, but not short. Sorry.
Honorable, please. The last question, please.
Thank you so much for your valuable contributions to all of the speakers. I'll make my question as short as possible because we don't have much of time. So we mentioned about the economic growth and social responsibility at the same time, and in this case, this idea automatically popped into my mind as the role of financial institutions and banks. So in this case, what are the financial regulations and commitments to encourage the investments for the necessary infrastructure for the energy transformation in line with the EU Green New Deal? Because maybe I might miss them, but we should also mention about that dimension. Thank you.
Okay. So, again, anybody who's a panelist to take these 2 questions?
And start.
Yeah.
So I like to start with the small, and it was one, the small country like Belgium, and the other is the small solutions, and put in a few facts. So first of all, 98% of the European economy is SMEs. So that's just a reminder. I was shocked when I read that statistic, because actually it means, and we have many very strong old family businesses and other SMEs that are really generating the European economy. And it's not the big multinational from the United States that are doing business here that are generating our economy. So I think that's very important, which means that beyond that, there's also the micro solutions of communities. And I fully agree with you. And let us not forget that many times, at least in Africa, those micro solutions are coming from women who are actually not being empowered or even part of the discussion around solutions in the country. So fully agree with you. There needs to be a shift. From a European perspective, that means that a lot of our innovation funding needs to be targeted towards smaller producers, smaller types of solutions, community solutions, and women-based solutions. So I think that's fundamental. In terms of Belgium and what Belgium can do, I can think of one big thing right now on the agenda in Belgium that should be taken into account and go into actually the new legislation, and that is the ecocide law. Belgium could actually be a leader, and I'm going to divulge the fact that I am an ambassador for ecocide, and that right now it's being blocked by certain political powers that be in the government because of deep sea mining. And because there's a fear that the industrial interests of deep sea mining would mean that actually Belgium could be brought to court with regard to ecocide. So if Belgium really wants to stand up to the plate and demonstrate that its regions are united in creating a future for all Belgians and the world, then putting in place the ecocide law would show incredible leadership. And I'll leave it at that.
Good.
Yeah, very good questions, but so much to say about it. First on Belgium, I will not comment much because it's too sensitive, so I leave that one to François. I just would want to say two things. First, when you see the North Sea Summit organized recently, I think this is a fantastic example of what Belgium can do. And secondly, I noticed that the Innovation Fund, which is funded by emission trading revenues, the biggest project ever has been granted to the Port of Antwerp. So there's a lot happening in industry in Belgium. One of the biggest producers of electrolyzers is Cockerill in the French-speaking part of Belgium. So a lot happening and a lot that gives us hope. Second, and on the small scale, I understand what you're saying. What we face here is the very important role of incumbent industries and incumbents. Very often the incumbents are setting the agenda still. We cannot simply dismiss them because our economy needs to go through a transition which takes the incumbents on board, but they need to be challenged much more. We have tried, for example, in Horizon Europe, which I know a bit better than other programs, to give scope to much more small-scale innovations through the European Innovation Council, European Research Council, small projects, etc. Then often what is lacking is the scale-up of this. What we need to do at European level is to look at replicability of solutions, because it doesn't really serve a purpose if we have a fantastic project but then stays in its niche. We really need scale-up. As far as Africa is concerned, there I agree with you, we need to become much better at concluding partnerships with African countries, with the South, that are a win-win and that do not impose our model on their cultures and situations. But that's a long discussion. And lastly, on finance, we have the sustainable finance strategy. We're doing a lot in terms of legislation. Some are saying way too much. The finance world is coming a little bit in revolt because we are prescribing too much. We have also the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, for example. We have the taxonomy that Adelaide indirectly referred to when she said about gas being labeled as green, which, by the way, is not true, but let's not go there. We didn't label it as green. So we're doing a lot on finance. A lot more will probably be needed. But I also see from the latest reports that banks are not doing as much as is needed, but increasingly are divesting from coal, for example. So there is a movement happening. But like with everything, and I conclude on this, good things are happening, but it's too little, too slow. And science tells us we need to do more. And that's where we need political support to be able to do more.
Yeah, I'm not going to take the floor because we have already talked way too much. I just think your second question was very interesting on the question of actually taking initiatives from Global South or just letting them taking their own initiatives. That's about decolonization, right? We have not talked enough about it today, but it's a huge topic that we need to put way more on the table in the global north and see how we have to actually support ideas and not impose them. But I think we have a lot to learn from history also on that.
Well, it resonates with what I've heard recently from an African writer, Selwyn Farr, stating that as far as the protection of biodiversity is concerned, Africans have no lessons to be given by anybody.
Yes. Well. Oh, sorry, and I just wanted to add that let's not forget also then the role of Western countries in also breaking and I will say break because I don't have any other synonyms coming, biodiversity in Global South. And many banks also are investing massively into that destruction. And those are Western banks. So let's also not forget our responsibility in what is happening also in the Global South.
Also.
Yes, well, first of all, let me answer the question. I'm sorry if I give the impression that everything is loom and gloom in Belgium, which is absolutely not the case. And we had clear examples. I would call them hardware examples. I would add to that the software. And the software is the way our civil society is active. I already mentioned it, and you alluded to it, but what happened is you advised, there was in the protest, there was a climate law which was written by civil society together with academics. It was presented, it was voted down in Parliament. But when you look at the text, which is really worthwhile, you see there a very serious way of tackling the governance issue which we face in Belgium, because what was on the table was very sensible. Of course, for politics, it was not acceptable, but it barely was shut down. So I think this is something extremely positive to mention as far as our country is concerned. The other thing I wanted to say is also something on climate change diplomacy and referring to Africa, because of course this is also an effect of the Ukraine war. We see that there is a lack of trust versus EU. And there are things which are not coherent in the foreign policy of the EU. And the fact that the 100 billions are not on the table as promised is a problem. The fact that what happened in for the vaccines and the intellectual property is a problem. And migration, of course, the way we deal with migration is a problem. So there needs to be something done about these issues if we want to be coherent in our dialogue with in our alliances with Africa.
Okay, now we'll stop here, Eva, for sure. I really want to thank very warmly on behalf of all of you, our panelists. I want to thank again TEPSA for first having contributed to the publication of this book. It's clearly, the debate tonight show how timely this was. So, no conclusion. We have identified the challenges, but we have also identified the opportunities, and what we have mainly stressed that more than ever, leadership will be needed in the future, whether it comes from judges, whether it comes from the local authorities, but leadership at all levels. The 2024 year will be a turning point again. We have to make sure that everything which has been launched survive, that it is finalized, that, okay, if there is a risk that some of the chapters of the pillars of Green Deals are, I would say, maybe not dropped, but somewhat put in the back burner, that risk should be as much as possible limited. And indeed, we have to find the right merit. So, a lot to be done. This debate this evening helped us to better understand the issues at stake. Thank you very much for having provided us with your insight. Thank you.